Anisha Dove is a founder of the Power to Break Free Foundation. And Anisha was inspired after a 7 years abusive marriage to empower other women to not suffer the same fate she did. She has written a book, The Power to Break Free. The Power to Break Free. Get this book, study it, and contact the author, The Power to Break Free. It's to break free from surviving domestic violence with a special reference to abuse in Indian marriages. Wow, the truth of it. She has provided a unique insight into the psychology of abuse from a survivor's perspective, and from domestic violence, and fuel them with the awareness they possess, the power to break free. Wow, empowering those that have been going through domestic violence. Anisha's unique insight into cultural sensitivity with abuse and way to support victims is crucial to fight this battle. She's an acupuncturist, Ayurvedic practitioner. I want her to talk about that a little bit. And yoga and meditation instructor who specialize in holistic approach to address trauma. Wow, a great and impacted things has gone on in everything I've written, I've spoken concerning her, but I'm sure the Lord will witness himself as she take us on this journey. Again, you're welcome, Anisha Dove, to take us on 20 minutes journey. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Joel, for that introduction. And thank you to the Tamar Family Support Unit for inviting me. And thank you to all of the wonderful presenters that we've heard today and are yet to hear. I look forward to hearing everybody's wisdom that they are sharing on this topic. And in our audience, thank you to all the women who are here that are victims, who are survivors, anyone who is a family member or part of the community that is supporting women that are going through this experience. I'm always so impressed by how many people we have that are dedicated to this topic and who've made this, who've broken this taboo that this abuse is something that we cannot talk about, because there's no way for us to end this unless we start talking about it, unless we acknowledge it. So what I would like to share with you today is coming from my background of being Indian, of being Hindu, some of the cultural expectations of Indian women that are just part of the culture, but one of the reasons why I felt very trapped in my marriage, and how I see that this plays out for so many women coming from that background. The truth is, you don't have to be Hindu or Christian or Muslim. It doesn't really matter. Abuse does not care what your background is. Women are experiencing this all over the world, all over the planet, regardless of our set of circumstances. So when I was married for 7 years, it took me 4 years to recognize that I was a victim of domestic violence. And people often ask me, why did it take so long to recognize that? And it's because abuse is really subtle. You know, the way abuse is portrayed in the media, when I grew up in high school, we had domestic violence, prevention seminars and education. I felt like I was very well educated. But what was portrayed about domestic violence is someone getting slapped in the face, someone getting beaten, someone getting injured, where there were visible marks, proof that someone was beaten. And so when I started to experience domestic violence and I didn't have a scar and I didn't have an injury, and it was so much more subtle, I didn't know how to label it. It didn't fit with what my image of domestic violence was, which is so extreme, what is in the media. So when the physical abuse started, the verbal abuse started right away on my honeymoon. The verbal abuse started physical abuse started 6 months later. And the first physical abuse incident was really just grabbing me by the shoulders and holding me too tight. And my abuser claimed he was just trying to calm me down. He was just trying to hug me. He was trying to offer comfort. And I said, I'm not feeling comforted. You're hurting me. I'm in pain. But it was something that was not in my image of what domestic violence is. And so, because of the subtlety, and of course, the physical abuse then escalated to something that could be recognized and did leave scars and did cause pain. But then I was married to someone who was a doctor. And the idea of showing up at the emergency room where my husband was on staff at that hospital, I didn't really feel like I could get support. I didn't feel there was any safety in that. My abuser was also here on a visa. And so I knew that if I went to the police ever, I jeopardized his medical license as a doctor, I jeopardized his visa status. And so I was working so hard to protect him, which is a situation that so many victims find themselves in, is protecting their abuser. So as long as you're in love with this person, you are trying to figure out, what can I do to help them? What do they need to do to manage their anger? And I understood later on that I had completely misdiagnosed the problem, that my abuser wasn't trying to improve himself. Everything about our abusive environment was working for him. And so when I finally took the steps to recognize I was a victim 4 years into the marriage, the first people I turned to were my mother-in-law and my sister-in-law. And I thought, here are two people that know him so well. Maybe now if I bring this issue to them, they will be able to help. And what I didn't realize at that time is they were not my allies. They enabled the abuser. Once they discovered it, they might have given lip service to feeling some compassion for me. But the truth is, they allowed it to continue. They took his side. They were fine with the abuse in the marriage continuing. So it took me another 2 years after that to then finally declare myself a victim of domestic violence and go out into the community and get support. And I went to my local domestic violence center at that time, and they were wonderful in terms of all the resources that they provided. But I realized that the basic limitation they had is there was nobody on faculty there that was Indian, that was Hindu, that understood my background and what I was struggling with. Because now I was struggling with more than the abuser, I was also struggling with a whole abusive family unit with in-laws supporting the abuser and enforcing his behavior, allowing him to feel more empowered. And this is something that is very common in Indian families, to be living in joint families, to be living with your in-laws, to not just be one couple, one husband and wife dealing with this situation, but multiple family members that are becoming involved in this abusive dynamic adds a lot of complexity. And I know this is not specific just to Indian families, but all over the world, we have many different type of cultures that still live in joint families where we're not going to have an abusive dynamic between just two people. And the more people that get involved, the more complexity is added to it. As a victim, when you become a victim of not just your abuser's behavior, but when you see all of his family members either being silent or supporting his behavior, it makes you feel more trapped. It makes you feel like you can't have a voice and there is nothing that you can do. And so one of the things that I did after going to my local domestic violence center is I decided to research online support groups and domestic violence organizations in particular for Indian women. And at the time, there were about 20 or so organizations all over America. There was one in my state of Florida where I lived, but it was 4 hours away. So I decided to get in the car one day and drive 4 hours to go meet this organization and just be in a room filled with people who understood what I was going through. And there were many people who were supportive, but I was also quite shocked at how many people judged me, even within my own community. So some of the first comments that I got were, oh, this is very surprising. You grew up in America. This only happens to Indian women who are immigrants who have come from India. And I said, no, that's not true. I had other people who said, well, you're in a higher socioeconomic group because you're married to a doctor. This can't happen to you. And I said, no, that's not true. Someone else said, well, you're married to a physician, so I'm sure there's no physical abuse. And I said, no, that's not true. Another person said, well, this only happens to poor Indians that live in villages and live on the farms. This doesn't happen to people who live in the city. And so even in my own community, I was shocked at the response I was getting, all of the misperceptions that existed, even in my own community, even within an organization dedicated to domestic violence, they still didn't really fully see me as a victim. Someone else said, well, you speak English so well. I'm sure you're not a victim because this only happens to Indian women that are immigrants who don't know the language, who don't know the system. Then I got judged by people who told me, well, you're well educated. Why didn't you do the research? Why didn't you go to the police? Why didn't you file a medical report at the hospital? Why didn't you reach out for help? And so what I want to say to all of the women out there who are victims is that don't let other people stop you when you have the courage to come out and to share your story. There are going to be plenty of people who don't understand, who don't have the right words, who don't know how to be supportive, but that doesn't matter. Don't let that deter you. You still need help and support, and there will be plenty of people out there who will surprise you with how much they're willing to step up. I had people who I barely knew who just, when I came out and started to share my story, stepped up and said, what can we do? How can we support you? What do you need from us? And just that genuine openness of people who were willing to do whatever it was they could do in their power and their ability to be supportive, that meant all the world to me. And so that is how we need to encourage women, is that regardless of their faith, regardless of their background, it doesn't matter. A victim is a victim. Abuse is abuse. It should never be tolerated. We always need to take a stand. If any woman is claiming abuse, we have to listen. We have to give resources, give support, do whatever we can to help them. So that's a little bit just about my story of how hard it was to come out and to share my story. And then when I thought I was getting help, there were still so many people that judged me and wanted to blame me and were not able to give that support. So I'm eternally always grateful for all of you who are dedicated to this, who are willing to give support, who are willing to empower victims. I think that is so fundamentally important. So one thing I would like to share is from my book, The Power to Break Free. The reason I wrote this book is when I started to understand I was a victim and reach out for help, I looked and researched all of the books I could on domestic violence. And I was surprised that so many of them were written by men, were written by therapists, were written by clinicians, but they weren't written by victims. And I really needed to hear the stories of women who had walked this path and survived and came out on the other end okay. I needed that to kind of give me fuel to get through my divorce, to get through my healing post that abusive trauma. So I essentially wrote the book that I felt like I needed to read and I couldn't find out there. And so the first part of the book, I write about the psychology of abuse because no one could answer the question, how did this happen to me? And I needed to know, how does it happen to someone who's strong, who's independent, who's well educated, who's a doctor, who believes in women's rights? It just made no sense to me that I could become a victim. And I realized if it could happen to me, it could happen to anybody. And so I needed to understand, what are the steps to become a victim? How was I controlled? How did my mind get broken down? How did I get trapped. I needed to understand what made an abuser an abuser, what were their tactics. And so I started researching in my community, interviewing other Indian Hindu women, hearing their stories. And there were little elements to our stories that were different, but the fundamental profile of the abuser was always the same. And so I went and interviewed Indian women that grew up in India. I interviewed women who grew up in America. I interviewed women who were poor, who were rich. It didn't matter. I just wanted to break all these stereotypes people had said. It doesn't happen to so-and-so. And I wanted to say, no, it happens to all of us. It doesn't really matter. So the first part of the book is on the psychology of abuse. The second part is my personal story. And then the third part of the book is interviews and stories of about 5 or 6 Indian women to kind of share how this plays out in so many different communities. If it's okay, I'd like to read a little passage from the book, a paragraph that specifically is about one of the traps in my culture is this idea that Indian women have to be the perfect wives, that they have to do everything to serve their husband. And this is something that's fundamentally we're grown up with as young Indian girls, this idea that marriage is everything. It's the culmination of our life experience to be married, to be a wife. And so this passage that I want to share is called Becoming the Perfect Wife. And as I read it, you'll start to understand the trap that not just Indian women, but so many women fall into this trap of wanting to be a good wife, of course, and wanting to save our marriage. So this is the passage, Becoming the Perfect Wife. I took more initiative in trying to fix our marriage. Every time an abusive incident occurred, I became the therapist, patiently explaining to him the pattern in which we were trapped. I was determined to appeal to his logical, rational side, even though there was no proof it existed. Surely, if he saw this incident was similar to the last incident, he would have more clarity, right? My explanations, however, only triggered his anger more. He reprimanded me. You are too emotional. You are always hanging on the past and cannot let things go. So I graciously forgave my husband and tried to forget these altercations so he would not accuse me of living in the past. I continued to work diligently on myself so we could eventually live an abuse-free life. I strived to eliminate every flaw my husband commented on so he could not criticize or blame me for his ire. I took it upon myself to run the household, prepare a hot Indian meal every night, and manage our finances. So he would not be inconvenienced, I ran errands on weekdays and handled all of our moves on my own so he would not waste time packing. I devoted my time attending to his needs, caring for his mother whenever she came to live with us for months at a time, and playing the role of an obedient Indian wife. I stepped out of the way so mother and son could bond and make up for all the lost years they had not seen each other, even though I felt left out. I distanced myself from my priorities and immersed myself in doing everything I could for his family. I forgot what was important to me and neglected my own needs, losing myself completely in this process. It was only a matter of time before the inevitable disintegration of my being. Now, you don't have to be Indian or Hindu to relate to that if you are a victim of domestic violence. We all lose ourselves in this process of doing whatever it is we need to do to be the perfect wife, to be the perfect mother. We do so much to neglect ourselves. And I realized that instead of blaming my abuser for me being trapped in this marriage, once I came out of this destructive relationship and went through my divorce and started the deeper healing journey to recover from my trauma, I realized ultimately I was trapped by my culture. I was trapped by the stereotypes of domestic violence. And I realized that I was trapped by my own mind, this idea that I had to be this perfect wife, that I had to serve him and his family, that I had to serve my community, that I had to pretend, become this actress and pretend that everything was all right. And I realized that the more I kept myself trapped, that there would be nobody left, that physically there was no way I could endure any more abuse. That moment that I left him was because I knew that my desire to live was so much stronger than my desire to save a marriage that was broken and not possible to save. And so for me, when I went to court to get a restraining order against my abuser, and had no medical records and no police records, no tangible evidence to support my case, the judge told me she believed me that I was a victim of domestic violence, but that I hadn't done anything to help her do her job, and that she couldn't issue this permanent restraining order. And at that moment, I felt something that changed my life. I wanted to get down on my knees and I wanted to scream for all of the women who've gone through this injustice, who've gone through this pain, and who have not been able to have a voice. I just felt this primal scream of every woman that has ever been wronged and who has ever felt this pain. And I decided at that moment that I would be that voice. I would be that voice for my generation, for my culture, and that I would do everything in my power to speak out, to reach out to as many communities as I could, domestic violence communities, Indian women communities, high schools, anybody I could, to share this message that life is so precious and sacred. And we are here for such a short amount of time on this planet. And if we really want to make the best of our lives, we all deserve to live lives of love and compassion. So my last message is that if you are trapped in a situation like this, you owe it to yourself to live your best life, to have a life that's filled with love and compassion, because that is what you deserve. And there is a whole community out there that's willing to support you to take whatever steps you need to find your freedom. So we truly all do have the power to break free. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Just within the time, 1 minute. Thank you very much. Thank you, Anisha. That was powerful and wonderful. She went through the route of us not living other people's life. The moment we start living other people's life, we have given our life away for others. She started, will take us through the route just before I call the fourth guest speaker, then we can go into question and answer. She took us through the background where she came from as an Indian and the culture of Indian. And it spoke about how she became trapped because of the culture and the way Indian does their things, especially when it comes to marriage and couple. So looking for every way to break free. Initially, it wasn't like she was trapped. She was just thinking it was a normal life. And because the way abuse is being defined is when you can see a mark, somebody being brutal, where you can see the action, where you can see the feeling. So she doesn't see what she's going through as an abuse, but in within an abuse that cannot be revealed or seen by any. There are bruises inside that cannot be revealed to people. And that is what she has been going through, because people are not seeing the scar. So nobody is knowing what she's going through. And for herself, because she wanted to be the best for others, she lost being the best for herself. So she went on to let us know that the abuse started verbally. And like everyone I've spoken about referral, observing all these things, it started from verbal. Like one of our first speakers said, when people are having domineering spirit, especially when we're in a meeting, and the wife is being trembled to speak because the husband was there. So it started verbally in their honeymoon and went further later to physical, where she's been grabbed by the neck, using a blackmailing word against her, and all sorts. But yet, because she wants something so badly to prove to people, and this is where we always get trapped in something and held under bondage, because we want to please the world and we are not pleasing ourselves. So she went further to talk about she was working so hard to protect the husband. She will change. He will become who I want him to become. He will become a good man. Plus the provision that covers the perpetrator. Do not let the action manifest or be seen by people. And she was wondering, how can I go there to report somebody of this caliber? So in all ways, she was trying to protect the man she loved. So in referral, she went to the family. Like we've all talked about referral. So our own referral was to the family. And these are the immediate family, the family of the husband. Thinking, okay, we are one family now. One of us are going through one thing. Our position is to stand in gap. But find out that they are the one aiding, because they are not stopping the perpetrator doing what he was doing. So he found himself alone, because the people that she need to lean on are leaning away from her. So, and the culture of Indian is similar to the culture of some African country, where we cohabit with family members. We always believe in extended family. It was now that we see something like nuclear family, that husband and wife and the children alone. But in the olden days, it has always been a family, and that is why family always have a big compound. The mother-in-law, the father-in-law, everyone will be living together. So in this kind of situation, there is nothing one person can do in the midst of 7 or 10 people. So regardless, if the 10 are going one way, you alone are going the other way, would not help. And that has not been very, very helpful for her to step out. She spoke about, now that she wanted to find out, she went to do research. Because if you don't have knowledge of what you are going through, you cannot handle the situation by yourself. So she was doing research, and in all her research, she was seeing it from the third party, not from the main victim. How has it happened to anybody that I can learn from? It's all about people suggesting, people that have not been through it, but are talking about it. But she was looking for somebody that has been through it so that she can know where to. Hence, she decided to be a testimony to others, that regardless, I still need to speak up. In going to court, in all that they did, there is no substantiated evidence. But the judge said, I believe you, because the judge knew there is something within nobody can see. So the position of changing faults to the person who has been victimized is with the husband, blackmailing her. And because she wanted to be a good wife and a good mother and a wife in the home to please the husband, she did everything, making sure that she's living the husband's life while neglecting her own life. It is very important. We need to know that we're supposed to be who we are. If anybody loves you, they will love you the way you are. But in her own case, she was trying by all means to make sure that the husband loves her for who the husband is or the husband wants. Obviously, there will be a lot of mistake. So she has been living other people's life and she found it so difficult. But along the way, she got the courage to step out and be able to speak out for others, that others need to hear about it. It's an example that we all need to learn from. Sometimes when we don't see anybody going through it, and she started talking to women, Indian women in the country, in America, all over the world, and now she can see where the culture have entrapped them to go through abuse unknowingly. So she started speaking up, and I'm sure the book will have helped a lot of people. So it's all in the same line of what we have been talking through. We call God to deliver us. God has given us instruction. Now she has spoken her own mind from what she has been through. And the question I would throw to you, and Anisha, when it comes to question and answer time. You made mention of one thing, that women are suffering all over the world. Let it be in your question and answer. Is it only women that are going through abuse all over the world, or has it been extended? So when that time comes, please, you can expatiate and elaborate on that. Anisha, we asked a question earlier on that you mentioned that women are suffering all over the world. Is it only women that are suffering where this abuse is concerned?
Thank you, Ambassador Joel. I think that's a wonderful question. And the truth is, no, it's not only women that suffer, because we see that within a family, the children suffer, right? When they watch their parents and their unhealthy dynamic, and when they see their mother suffering, we see that it's not just contained within the family, but those relatives see their daughter suffering, or their sister suffering, or whatever family member it might be. And then we see that abuse, there's a ripple effect, right? It keeps continuing outside of our home, our physical home. It starts to affect our community. It starts to affect our economy. It starts to affect just the way women are portrayed and treated everywhere. So I think any little girl growing up who is being taught that she is groomed for marriage, and that she is property, and that she is her husband's servant, and that she must do his bidding, we are doing a disservice to our community for little girls to receive that message. We need to be teaching equality to everybody, not just little girls, but even little boys, because in the end, abuse only ends when we have compassionate men, right? I applaud the men that are here on this panel that are voicing their concerns, that want to be part of this movement to end domestic violence. But it has to start with little boys growing up, understanding that they have to treat women well, their sisters, their mothers, their friends, because only when we raise compassionate men will this ever end. We need to take responsibility of not just educating women how to be strong, how to stand up for themselves, how to break their silence, but we also need to educate little boys. How do we learn to respect women? So the responsibility falls on all of us, because in the end, all of us become victims of domestic violence, and we all suffer. Our communities suffer. And, as a speaker, an advocate for an activist for domestic violence, I've spoken to so many different types of communities now. When I go and speak to medical doctors, hospitals, I talk about the economic consequences of our emergency rooms, and the percentage of visits of women coming into those emergency rooms. Such a high percentage are domestic violence victims, right? And now in American hospitals, they are trained to ask this question of women privately. If they come in with a male partner, they ask them privately, do you feel safe at home? That is an amazing change that we see that happening now. When I go and speak to businesses, I talk about the economic effect of domestic violence and how it affects their bottom line, that if they're not protecting the women that are part of their company will suffer. So I think when you ask that question, Ambassador Joel, who is the real victim? Of course, the women who are undergoing violence and suffering are the biggest victims, but the truth is it ends up affecting everybody. Our entire community is always going to be affected. And, I think what's relevant in this day and time with this global pandemic and COVID, and we are hearing about how domestic violence women are trapped in quarantine with their abusers and are so much more at risk. We understand that we are a global family. Anything that happens with the pandemic in one part of the world affects all of us. And so we understand that if one woman is suffering in her home at the hands of an abuser, we all suffer. Every single woman feels that collective pain, and every compassionate man feels that pain. And so ultimately, it's upon all of us to realize that until this ends, until we create a compassionate community, we will always, all of us, be suffering together.
Thank you very much for that expansion. Thank you very much. This another one that you need to attend to, ma'am. He said, if you are married to a family and this family tells you as a wife, you can't talk or have opinion in matters that affect you or your marriage, your husband family dictates to your husband, family dictates to your husband how he should behave or handle the home. In that, the wife is experiencing some psychological effect. She's no longer herself. She's not operating in the sphere she used to before marriage. She's not enjoying the marriage as she used to. How can this situation be addressed, and how can this wife gain her and confidence back?
It's very difficult, right, to go against your husband, to go against your in-laws, to go against your immediate family, your extended family, your community. It's hard to go against your culture. It's hard to go against the stereotypes that exist out there. But fundamentally, what I would tell any victim is when the price is your life, when the price is your well-being, that it's not worth it. There's nothing that's worth it. Pastor Sade shared that tragic story at the end of her speech about that woman who lost her life. And unfortunately, this is just too common a story. We should not be hearing about this in the news all the time. It shouldn't be happening every day. We should be having so many more people speaking out. So for anyone who is scared and trapped, we all understand what that feels like. But in the end, the price you pay is your life, and it's not worth it. Your life is too sacred and too valuable to let anything else dictate staying trapped.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Your life matters in a nutshell. Thank you very much.